The water was rising faster than Fiona Calloway had ever seen in her 22 years living in White Pine, Nevada. And the moment she realized the creek had transformed into a raging torrent that completely surrounded her small cabin, genuine fear seized her chest like an iron fist. She pressed her face against the cold window glass, watching the muddy brown water swirl and churn around the wooden structure that had been her home for the past 3 years. The spring runoff had been bad before, but never like this. The snowpack in the Ruby Mountains must have melted all at once, combined with the relentless rain that had been falling for 4 straight days. What had been a gentle creek that bubbled past her property had become a churning monster that now lapped at the bottom step of her porch. Fiona stepped back from the window and wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The cabin felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in. She had supplies, thank goodness. Her pantry was well stocked with flour, beans, salt pork, and preserves. She had firewood stacked inside near the hearth. She could wait this out. The water would recede eventually. It had to. But as the hours passed and the rain continued its steady assault on the roof, the water did not recede. Instead, it climbed higher. By late afternoon, it had covered the bottom 2 steps. By evening, it was touching the porch itself. Fiona dragged her furniture away from the walls, moving everything she could to higher ground. She pulled her mother's quilts and her father's books onto the table, then onto the bed frame when the table no longer seemed high enough. Her parents had died 5 years ago, taken by fever within days of each other. She had been just 17, suddenly alone in a harsh world. But she had survived. She had kept the small ranch going, tending the vegetable garden, raising chickens, doing laundry and mending for the miners and ranch hands in White Pine. It was not an easy life, but it was hers. She had carved it out with her own 2 hands and her stubborn refusal to give up. The cabin sat on what she had always thought was high enough ground, a mile outside of town where the creek bent in a lazy curve. She had liked the isolation, the peace. Now that isolation felt like a death sentence. As darkness fell, Fiona lit her oil lamps and tried to calm the panic that kept rising in her throat. The water was seeping under the door now, a dark stain spreading across her wooden floor. She stuffed rags and towels along the gap, but it barely slowed the intrusion. The creek was determined to claim her home. She climbed onto her bed and wrapped herself in blankets, watching the water slowly creep across her floor. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion finally claimed her sometime after midnight, her dreams filled with the sound of rushing water and her mother's voice calling her name. When she woke to gray dawn light filtering through the windows, the water was 6 inches deep inside the cabin. Fiona gasped and pulled her feet up onto the bed. The sight made her stomach clench with fear. This was real. This was happening. She could die here alone, trapped like a rat in a cage of her own making. Why had she not left when she first saw the creek rising? Pride, stubbornness, the foolish belief that she could weather anything. She had no boat. No way to cross the churning water that now surrounded her cabin on all sides, stretching in every direction like a brown inland sea. She could see trees poking up from the water, fence posts marking invisible boundaries beneath the surface. Her chicken coop had vanished entirely. Her garden was gone. Everything she had worked for was being swallowed by the flood. The rain had finally stopped, but that brought little comfort. The damage was done. The water would take days to recede, maybe longer, and it was still rising. By mid-morning, the water inside was nearly a foot deep. Fiona had climbed on top of her wardrobe, dragging blankets and what food she could reach up with her. She felt ridiculous and terrified in equal measure. From her perch, she could see through the window to the brown expanse beyond. No one was coming. No one even knew she needed help. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and the town was in the opposite direction. She was going to die here. That was when she saw him. At first, she thought the fear and lack of sleep were making her see things. A dark shape moving through the water, too deliberate to be debris. She rubbed her eyes and looked again. A man. A man was swimming toward her cabin, his arms cutting through the muddy water with strong, purposeful strokes. Fiona scrambled down from the wardrobe, splashing through the water inside her cabin to press her face against the window. Yes, definitely a man, and he was heading straight for her. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled. She waded to the door and struggled to open it against the pressure of the water. It finally gave way, swinging inward and allowing more of the creek to pour inside. She did not care. She stood in the doorway, clinging to the frame, watching as the man drew closer. He was broad-shouldered and strong. She could see that even from a distance. He wore a dark shirt that clung to his muscular frame and a hat that somehow remained fixed to his head despite his exertions. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. A strong jaw shadowed with stubbled, dark hair plastered to his forehead, and eyes that were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Hold on," he called out, his voice deep and rough. "I am almost there." Fiona wanted to call back, but her voice seemed to have abandoned her. She simply stood there, gripping the doorframe, watching as he covered the final yards between them. When he reached the porch, he grabbed onto one of the support posts and hauled himself up. Water streamed from his clothes as he stood, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. He was even more striking up close. Tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark brown eyes that held a warmth despite the cold circumstances. His face was handsome in a rugged way, all hard lines and weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. "You are Fiona Calloway?" he asked, slightly breathless from the swim. "I am," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you know?" "Everyone in White Pine knows about the woman who lives alone by the creek," he said. "When the water started rising, I got worried, figured someone should check on you." He glanced past her into the cabin, taking in the water that now covered her floor. "Good thing I did. Who are you?" she asked. "Xavier Miller," he said, extending a wet hand. "I work at the Thornton Ranch 5 miles north, been there about 6 months now." She took his hand, feeling the strength in his grip, the calluses that spoke of hard work. "Thank you for coming. I thought I was going to die here." "Not on my watch," he said firmly. "But we need to get you out of here. This water is still rising and this cabin is not going to hold much longer." "Can you swim?" Fiona felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "No, I never learned." Xavier's expression did not change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Concern, maybe, or determination. "All right, that is fine. I will get you across. Do you have anything you need to take with you, things you cannot bear to lose?" She thought of her mother's quilts, her father's books, the small wooden box that held the only photographs she had of her parents. "Just a few things. Give me a moment." She waded back into the cabin, acutely aware of Xavier following her. She climbed onto the bed and gathered her precious items, stuffing them into a canvas bag. The water was rising faster now, she could see it. Xavier was right. They needed to leave immediately. "That everything?" he asked. She nodded, clutching the bag to her chest. "All right. Here is what we are going to do. I am going to carry you on my back. You are going to hold on to me as tight as you can, and you are not going to let go no matter what. The current is strong, but I can handle it. You just have to trust me. Can you do that?" Fiona looked into his eyes and saw nothing but steady confidence there. This man had swum through dangerous floodwaters to reach her, a stranger. He would not let her drown now. "I trust you." "Good. Put that bag across your body so your hands are free. then climb on. With shaking hands, Fiona adjusted the bag so it hung diagonally across her chest. Xavier turned his back to her and crouched down slightly. She hesitated for just a moment, then wrapped her arms around his neck and her legs around his waist. He straightened, his hands coming back to support her thighs, and the casual strength with which he lifted her made her heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Ready?" he asked. "As I will ever be," she replied, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Xavier waded out of the cabin and back onto the porch. Fiona could feel the muscles in his back working beneath his wet shirt. She tightened her grip as he walked to the edge and then, without hesitation, stepped off into the churning water. The cold shocked her system as they went under. She felt Xavier's powerful strokes propelling them back to the surface. When they broke through, she gasped for air, her face pressed against the side of his neck. She could feel his heart beating, strong and steady, and she focused on that rhythm to keep her panic at bay. The current was fierce, trying to pull them downstream, but Xavier was fiercer. He cut through the water with determined strokes, his breathing steady despite the weight on his back. Fiona kept her eyes squeezed shut, trusting him to navigate. Water splashed over her head, getting in her nose and mouth, but she did not loosen her grip. Time lost all meaning. She did not know if they had been in the water for minutes or hours. All she knew was the cold, the churning current, and the solid strength of the man carrying her. His hands never wavered in their support of her legs. His swimming never faltered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she felt his feet touch bottom. They were in shallower water. A few more steps and they were on muddy ground that squelched beneath his boots. Xavier did not stop until they were well clear of the water's edge, trudging up a slope to where a large chestnut horse stood tethered to a tree. Only then did he sink to his knees, allowing Fiona to slide off his back. They both collapsed onto the wet grass, breathing hard. Fiona's entire body was shaking, partly from cold but mostly from the realization of what had just happened. She had almost died. If not for this man, this stranger who had risked his own life, she would have drowned in her own home. "Are you all right?" Xavier asked between breaths, rolling onto his side to look at her. Fiona nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Tears began to stream down her face, mixing with the creek water that already soaked her. She was not a woman who cried easily, but the fear and relief and gratitude all crashed over her at once, overwhelming her defenses. Xavier sat up and gently pulled her up with him, wrapping his arms around her. "You are safe now," he murmured against her wet hair. "I have got you. You are safe." She buried her face against his chest and let herself cry, her fingers clutching his soaked shirt. He held her firmly, one hand rubbing slow circles on her back, murmuring reassurances. He smelled like creek water and horse and something else, something masculine and comforting that made her feel protected in a way she had not felt since her father died. When the tears finally subsided, Fiona pulled back, embarrassed by her display. "I am sorry. I do not usually fall apart like that. You just survived a flood," Xavier said gently. "I would say you are entitled to a few tears." He stood and offered her his hand. "But we need to get you warm and dry before you catch your death. Can you ride?" "Yes," she said, taking his hand and letting him pull her to her feet. Her legs felt unsteady, but she managed to stay upright. Xavier led her to his horse, a beautiful mare with intelligent eyes. He untied a bedroll from behind the saddle and wrapped it around Fiona's shoulders, then lifted her effortlessly onto the horse before swinging up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, and she found herself enclosed in his warmth, his solid presence at her back. "Where are we going?" she asked as he turned the horse north. "To the Thornton Ranch," he replied. It is on high ground, well away from any flooding. You can stay there until the water recedes and it is safe to go back to town." "I could not impose," Fiona began, but Xavier cut her off. "You are not imposing. Mrs. Thornton would have my hide if I pulled you out of a flood and then did not see you properly cared for. Besides, it is the closest safe place. Town is underwater right now. Half of White Pine evacuated to higher ground yesterday." Fiona absorbed this information in silence as the horse picked its way through the muddy terrain. She had been so focused on her own survival that she had not thought about the town. "Was anyone hurt?" "Not that I heard before I left to find you, but there was a lot of property damage. It is going to take weeks to clean up." She thought about her cabin, about the water that had been steadily climbing its walls. "Do you think my home will survive?" Xavier was quiet for a moment. "I do not know," he said honestly. "It depends on how high the water gets and how long it stays. But we will find out together. I will help you, whatever you need." His words sent a warm feeling through her chest that had nothing to do with the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You have already done so much. You saved my life." "And I would do it again," he said simply, and she believed him. They rode in silence for a while, Fiona gradually warming up from the combined heat of Xavier's body and the steady movement of the horse beneath them. She found herself acutely aware of him, of the way his arms bracketed her body as he held the reins, of his breath stirring her wet hair, of the solid warmth of his chest against her back. It was improper, being held so intimately by a man she had just met, but propriety seemed like a luxury she could not afford at the moment. "You said you have been at the Thornton Ranch for 6 months, she said, more to distract herself from her awareness of him than anything else. "Where were you before that, Montana?" Xavier replied. "I worked on a ranch up there for a few years. Before that, I was in Wyoming. I have been moving around since I was 18, working cattle mostly, sending money back home when I could." "Home, Missouri." "My parents have a small farm outside of St. Joseph, 3 younger sisters who all needed dowries." She could hear the smile in his voice. "I am the oldest, so it fell to me to help provide." "That is admirable," Fiona said softly. "Not many men would sacrifice so much for their family." "Family is everything," Xavier said simply. "What about you?" "I heard you live alone, but that is about all I know." Fiona took a breath, surprised by how easy it felt to talk to him. "My parents died of fever 5 years ago. I was 17. They left me the cabin and a small piece of land. I have been making my way ever since, doing laundry and mending, selling vegetables from my garden. It is not much, but it was mine." "Was?" Xavier asked gently. "I do not know what will be left after this," she admitted. The thought made her chest tighten with anxiety. Everything she had worked for, possibly destroyed in a single day. "We will figure it out," Xavier said firmly. "Whatever needs to be done, we will figure it out." There it was again. We. As if they were a team, as if he planned to be part of her life beyond this rescue. Fiona did not know what to make of that, so she simply let herself lean back against him and trust that he meant what he said. The Thornton Ranch came into view as the sun began to break through the clouds. It was a sprawling operation with a large main house, several barns, and numerous outbuildings. Fiona had heard of the Thorntons, but had never met them. They were one of the wealthier families in the area, with a successful cattle operation that employed a dozen hands year-round. As they rode into the yard, a woman emerged from the main house, shading her eyes to see who was arriving. She was middle-aged, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and a practical dress covered by an apron. Her face broke into a relieved smile when she recognized Xavier. "Thank the Lord," she called out. "We were getting worried. Did you find her?" "I found her, Mrs. Thornton," Xavier replied, bringing the horse to a stop near the porch. Miss Calloway, this is Martha Thornton. Madam, this is Fiona Calloway, the woman from the cabin by the creek. Martha hurried down the steps, her expression shifting to concern as she took in Fiona's bedraggled state. You poor dear. Xavier, get her inside immediately. She needs dry clothes and hot food. Come on, child, let me take care of you. Xavier dismounted and then lifted Fiona down, his hands strong and sure on her waist. Martha immediately took her arm and began leading her toward the house, talking in a steady stream about hot baths and warm soup and extra quilts. Fiona glanced back at Xavier, who was unsaddling his horse. He caught her eye and gave her an encouraging nod, and that simple gesture made her feel like everything might actually be all right. Inside, the house was warm and spacious, filled with sturdy furniture and the smell of fresh bread. Martha led Fiona upstairs to a cozy bedroom and immediately began preparing a bath, hauling in buckets of hot water that must have been heating on the stove. She brought towels and a clean dress, chattering the whole time about how worried Xavier had been, how he had insisted on going to check on the woman by the creek, despite everyone telling him it was too dangerous. That is Xavier for you, Martha said as she poured the last bucket into the tub. Heart bigger than the whole state of Nevada. Now you get in that bath and warm yourself up. I will have hot soup ready when you come down. That dress should fit you well enough. It was my daughter's before she married and moved to California. Thank you, Fiona managed. You are very kind. Nonsense, Martha replied briskly. Any decent person would do the same. Now get warm. Take your time. She bustled out, closing the door behind her. Alone for the first time since Xavier had arrived at her cabin, Fiona stripped out of her sodden clothes and sank into the hot water. The warmth seeped into her bones, chasing away the lingering chill of the flood. She washed the creek mud from her hair and skin, gradually feeling more like herself. But as she bathed, she found her thoughts returning again and again to Xavier. The way he had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not even known how to form. The strength in his arms as he carried her through the dangerous water. The gentleness with which he had held her while she cried. The warmth in his dark eyes and the confidence in his voice when he promised to help her. She barely knew him, but something inside her recognized something in him. A kindness, a strength, a goodness that was rare in the harsh world of the frontier. He had risked his life for her without hesitation, without expectation of reward. What kind of man did that? Fiona dried herself and pulled on the borrowed dress. It was simple but clean, made of soft blue cotton that felt like luxury after days in the same clothes. She brushed out her long, dark hair and braided it loosely, then made her way downstairs, following the smell of soup and bread. She found Martha in the kitchen, stirring a large pot on the stove. The older woman smiled when she saw her. That is much better. You have some color back in your cheeks. Sit down, and I will get you fed. Fiona sat at the long wooden table, accepting a bowl of rich beef stew and a thick slice of fresh bread. Her stomach growled as the smell hit her, reminding her that she had not eaten since the previous morning. She ate gratefully, the hot food warming her from the inside. Xavier is seeing to his horse and then he will be in, Martha said, sitting down across from Fiona with her own bowl. He was soaked through as well, the foolish boy, but he would not hear of anyone else going after you. Said it was too dangerous to send someone who was not a strong swimmer, and he grew up swimming in the Missouri River. I owe him my life, Fiona said quietly. He would say he was just doing what needed to be done, Martha replied with a fond smile. That is Xavier's way. Never looking for credit, just doing what is right. He is a good man. One of the best hands my husband has ever hired. Reliable, hard-working, honest, never complains, never causes trouble, just puts his head down and does the work. Before Fiona could respond, the kitchen door opened and Xavier walked in, his dark hair still damp from washing, wearing dry clothes. His eyes immediately found Fiona, and she saw relief flash across his face when he saw her looking more settled. "Feeling better?" he asked, accepting a bowl of stew from Martha. "Much better," Fiona assured him. "Thank you for everything." Xavier shrugged, looking almost embarrassed by her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Fiona said firmly. "They would not have. You risked your life for a stranger. That is not something anyone would do." Their eyes met across the table, and Fiona felt something pass between them, a connection she could not quite name but felt deep in her chest. Xavier held her gaze for a long moment before looking down at his soup, a faint color rising in his cheeks. Martha watched them with knowing eyes but said nothing, simply refilling their bowls when they finished and pressing more bread on them. After the meal, she showed Fiona to the sitting room where a fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth. "You rest here as long as you need," Martha said. "We have plenty of room. You will stay with us until the water goes down and we can assess the damage to your property." "I do not want to be a burden," Fiona protested. "You are not a burden, you are a guest," Martha said firmly, "and I will not hear another word about it. Now rest. You have been through a terrible ordeal." After Martha left, Fiona settled into a comfortable chair near the fire, her borrowed dress pooling around her feet. She tried to rest, but her mind would not be still. She kept thinking about her cabin, wondering what state it would be in when the water finally receded. Everything she owned was there. All her memories of her parents, her livelihood, her independence. What would she do if it was all gone? She must have dozed off despite her worries, because when she opened her eyes the light had changed. Late afternoon, sun slanted through the windows and Xavier sat in the chair opposite her, watching the fire. "I am sorry," she said, sitting up straighter. "I did not mean to fall asleep." "You needed the rest," Xavier said, turning to look at her. His expression was gentle. "You have been through a lot." "So have you," she pointed out. "You swam through a flooded creek twice today." "I am used to hard physical work," he said with a slight smile. "A little swimming is nothing." Fiona studied him in the firelight. There was something solid about him, something steady and reliable that made her feel safe. "Why did you come for me?" she asked suddenly. "You said everyone in town knew about me, but that does not explain why you specifically decided to risk your life." Xavier was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "3 weeks ago, I was in town getting supplies. I saw you coming out of the general store with a heavy basket of laundry. You looked exhausted but determined, and there was something about the way you held your head up high, like you were daring the world to knock you down." He paused, a soft smile playing at his lips. "I asked someone who you were. They told me about how you had been orphaned young, how you lived alone and made your own way. I admired that. When I heard where you lived, right by the creek, I started worrying when the rain would not stop. I knew that area would flood if the water got high enough. So when it did, I had to check on you. I would not have been able to live with myself if something had happened and I could have prevented it." His words made something warm unfurl in Fiona's chest. He had noticed her. He had thought about her. He had cared enough to risk his life. "I am glad you came," she said softly. "So am I," Xavier replied, and the way he looked at her made her breath catch. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire dance and crackle. Fiona found herself wondering about this man who had crashed into her life so dramatically. What did he like? What did he dream about? What made him laugh? She wanted to know everything, and that realization startled her. She had spent the last 5 years focused solely on survival, on maintaining her independence. She had not had time or energy to think about men, about romance, about anything beyond getting through each day. But something about Xavier made her want to think about those things. "Tell me about Missouri," she said. "About your family." Xavier's face softened. "My pa is a farmer. Works the land from sunup to sundown, same as his father before him. My ma is the strongest woman I know. Raised 4 children, kept the house running, and still found time to help any neighbor who needed it. My sisters are Mary, Elizabeth, and Catherine. Mary is 21 now, probably married by the time this year is out. Elizabeth is 19 and already has half the boys in the county courting her. Catherine is 16 and more interested in books than boys, much to my mother's dismay." Fiona smiled at the affection in his voice. "You miss them?" "Every day," he admitted. "But I needed to make my own way, and there was not enough land for me and my pa both. So I left when I was 18, promised to send money back when I could. It was the right choice, but it was not an easy one." "How old are you now?" she asked. 25, he said. "What about you?" 22, she replied. "Though sometimes I feel twice that age." "I know what you mean," Xavier said. "The frontier has a way of aging a person fast." They talked for hours as the sun set and Martha brought in more lamps. Xavier told her about his years working ranches across the West, about the characters he had met and the places he had seen. Fiona told him about her parents, about the struggle to keep the cabin and make a living, about the small joys she found in her garden and her work. They discovered they both loved books, both missed having family close, both felt the loneliness of the frontier life even as they valued their independence. When Martha finally came to shoo them both to bed, Fiona realized she had not thought about the flood or her cabin in hours. She had been too caught up in getting to know Xavier, in the easy way they talked, in the comfortable silences that fell between their words. As she lay in the borrowed bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Fiona knew her life had changed. Not just because of the flood, but because of Xavier. In the span of a single day, he had become important to her in a way she could not fully explain. She had been alone for so long, relying only on herself. But now there was someone else, someone who cared, someone who had proven he would be there when she needed him. It was both thrilling and terrifying. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Fiona woke to the smell of bacon frying and coffee brewing. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, finding Martha already busy in the kitchen. "Good morning, dear," Martha said cheerfully. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," Fiona replied. It was true. Despite everything, she had slept deeply and dreamlessly, her body finally catching up on the rest it needed. "Xavier and Mr. Thornton have gone out to check on the flooding," Martha said, setting a plate of bacon and eggs in front of Fiona. "They should be back by midday with news. In the meantime, you just relax. Read a book, sit by the fire, whatever you need." But Fiona found she could not relax. She was not used to idleness, and being waited on made her uncomfortable. "Is there anything I can help with?" she asked. "Mending, cooking, anything?" Martha looked surprised but pleased. "Well, if you are offering, I have a basket of mending that never seems to get any smaller." "But you do not have to, dear. You are a guest." "I would feel better if I had something useful to do," Fiona admitted. "Sitting still has never been my strong suit," Martha laughed. "I can understand that. All right then, come with me." They spent the morning working together, mending shirts and pants for the ranch hands. Fiona found she enjoyed Martha's company. The older woman was kind and practical, with a ready laugh and a wealth of stories about ranch life. She had raised 3 children here, she told Fiona, though all of them had grown and moved away now. Her husband Tom was a good man but not much for conversation, so she appreciated having another woman to talk to. "Xavier is a good influence on Tom," Martha said as they worked. Gets him talking about cattle and horses, which is about the only thing Tom ever wants to discuss anyway. But Xavier actually listens, asks good questions. Most of the hands just do what they are told and collect their pay. Xavier actually cares about the work, about doing it right. He seems like that kind of person, Fiona said, threading her needle. He is lonely, though, Martha said, giving Fiona a meaningful look. I can see it in him sometimes. He works hard, keeps to himself mostly. I do not think he has let himself have much of a life beyond work and sending money home. A young man like that should have more, should have someone. Fiona felt her cheeks heat and focused intently on her stitching. I am sure he will find someone when he is ready. Maybe he already has, Martha said softly, but she let the subject drop. Xavier and Tom Thornton returned just after noon, their horses muddy but their spirits good. The water was already starting to recede, Xavier reported. It was still too high to safely check on Fiona's cabin, but if it continued to drop at this rate, they should be able to make it there in another day or two. Over the next few days, Fiona settled into life on the Thornton ranch. She helped Martha with cooking and cleaning, earning her keep even though Martha protested it was not necessary. The ranch hands treated her with polite respect, tipping their hats when they saw her and thanking her for the meals she helped prepare. But it was Xavier she found herself watching for, waiting for. He worked long days with the cattle and horses, but he always made time in the evenings to sit with her by the fire. They talked about everything and nothing, discovering new things about each other every day. She learned that he could not carry a tune to save his life, but loved music anyway. He learned that she had a talent for drawing and had filled sketchbooks with images of the Nevada landscape. He told her about stampedes he had survived and rivers he had crossed. She told him about the books she had read, and the dreams she had once had of seeing the ocean. With each conversation, Fiona felt herself falling a little more. It was not just his handsome face or his strong body, though she certainly noticed both. It was the way he listened when she talked, really listened, like her words mattered. It was the way he helped Martha carry water without being asked, the way he spoke gently to the horses, the way his face lit up when he saw Fiona in the morning. It was the kindness that seemed to be woven into the very fabric of who he was. She caught him watching her sometimes, his dark eyes soft with something that made her heart race. But he was always respectful, always proper. He never touched her beyond the occasional brush of hands when he passed her something, never said anything that crossed the line of propriety. But the air between them seemed charged with possibility, with the unspoken acknowledgement that something was growing between them. On the fourth day after the rescue, Xavier announced that the water had dropped enough to safely check on her cabin. Fiona's stomach clenched with anxiety as she prepared for the journey. She had been trying not to think too much about what they might find, but now she had to face it. Xavier saddled 2 horses and helped her mount. They rode in silence toward her property, following the path of the creek. The damage was evident everywhere they looked. Trees had been uprooted, fences destroyed, debris scattered across the landscape. The creek was back within its banks now, but those banks had been significantly altered by the force of the flood. When they finally reached her cabin, Fiona's heart sank. The structure was still standing, but barely. The water had warped the walls and the door hung at an angle. The windows were intact but filthy with mud. The porch sagged dangerously. Xavier dismounted and helped her down. "Wait here," he said. "Let me check to make sure it is safe." Fiona nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She watched as Xavier carefully approached the cabin, testing each board of the porch before putting his weight on it. He managed to push the door open and disappeared inside. He was gone for several minutes that felt like hours. When he finally emerged, his expression was grim. "It is not good," he said gently, coming to stand beside her. "The structure is compromised. The floor is rotting. The walls are unstable. I do not think it can be saved, Fiona." She had been preparing herself for this possibility, but hearing it stated so plainly still felt like a physical blow. That cabin had been her home, her sanctuary, the last connection to her parents. And now it was gone. "I can go in and try to salvage some things," Xavier continued. "If there is anything important you need, I will do my best to get it out safely." "My mother's quilts," Fiona said, her voice breaking, "and my father's books. There is a wooden box under the bed with photographs and letters, and my sketchbooks if they survived." "I will get whatever I can," Xavier promised. He squeezed her shoulder gently and then went back inside. Fiona stood in the muddy yard, hugging herself, watching the ruined cabin. 5 years of her life gone. All her hard work, her independence, her sense of security. What was she going to do now? Where was she going to live? She had no money to rebuild, no family to turn to. She was alone. Except she was not alone, she realized. Not anymore. Xavier made several trips in and out of the cabin, carrying out items and laying them in a dry spot. The quilts were water-damaged but salvageable. He found the box of photographs and letters, miraculously dry in its oilcloth wrapping. Her sketchbooks had not fared as well, but some of the drawings could be saved. He brought out her dishes, her clothes, her tools, anything that had survived the water. "I am sorry," he said when he finally finished, coming to stand beside her again. "I wish I could save the cabin itself." "You did save the most important thing," Fiona said softly. "You saved me." Xavier turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. There was such tenderness there, such care. "Fiona," he said, and then stopped as if unsure how to continue. "What?" she asked. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "I know this is not the right time. You have just lost your home, and the last thing you need is me complicating things. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." Fiona's heart began to race. "What do you feel?" "I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the first time I saw you in town," Xavier said, the words coming faster now. "And then, when I pulled you out of that flood, when I held you while you cried, something just clicked into place. Like I had been waiting my whole life for you and did not even know it. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for a few days. But I also know that I do not want to imagine my life without you in it. And if you do not feel the same way, I will respect that. But I had to tell you. I had to be honest." Fiona stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had been raised to be practical, to be cautious, to guard her heart. But standing here in the ruins of her old life, looking at the man who had risked everything to save her, practicality felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. Life was too short, too unpredictable. She had learned that lesson the hard way. "I feel the same way," she whispered. Xavier's eyes widened. "You do?" "I do," she said, louder this time, more certain. "I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude, just the circumstances bringing us together. But it is more than that. When I am with you, I feel safe. I feel seen. I feel like I can be myself without apology. And I do not want to lose that. I do not want to lose you." The smile that spread across Xavier's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He took a step closer, reaching up to cup her face with his rough, gentle hands. "You will never lose me," he said fiercely. "I promise you that." And then he kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But Fiona leaned into him, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, and the kiss deepened. It was her first kiss, and it was perfect. It tasted like hope and new beginnings and the promise of better things to come. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Come back to the ranch with me," he said. "Stay with me. We will figure out what to do about the cabin later. Right now, I just need you safe and near me." "Yes," Fiona said simply. There was nowhere else she wanted to be. They loaded what could be salvaged onto the horses and rode back to the Thornton ranch. Martha took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly, but said nothing, simply helping Fiona bring her rescued belongings upstairs. That evening, after supper, Xavier asked Tom Thornton if he could speak with him privately. Fiona waited anxiously in the sitting room with Martha, who patted her hand reassuringly. "He is asking for permission to court you," Martha said. "Tom will say yes, of course. He is fond of Xavier, and anyone can see that you two are good for each other." "It all seems so fast," Fiona said, though without any real worry. "When you know," Martha said wisely. "I knew I was going to marry Tom the day I met him. Sometimes the heart just recognizes its match." When Xavier emerged from Tom's study, he was grinning. He crossed the room to Fiona and took her hands. "He said yes. He said as long as you are willing, I have his blessing to court you properly." "I am willing," Fiona said, smiling up at him. The next weeks passed in a blur of happiness. Xavier courted her with old-fashioned propriety, always conscious of Martha's watchful eye. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow. He taught her to ride better, taking her on long rides through the Nevada countryside. He sat with her in the evenings and listened as she drew, fascinated by the way her hands could create beauty from blank paper. Fiona found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone. She told him about the loneliness of the past 5 years, about the nights she cried herself to sleep missing her parents, about the fear that she would never be anything more than the poor orphan girl doing laundry. Xavier listened to all of it, holding her hand, offering comfort without judgment. He told her things too. About the guilt he sometimes felt for leaving his family, even though he knew it was necessary. About his dreams of eventually having his own small ranch, nothing fancy, just enough land for some cattle and horses and a family. About how empty he had felt before meeting her, how he had been going through the motions of life without really living it. Tom Thornton offered to help rebuild Fiona's cabin, but after talking it through, Fiona and Xavier decided there was no point. The location was too prone to flooding, and Fiona no longer wanted to live alone and isolated. Instead, Tom offered Xavier a permanent position as foreman and the use of a small house on the ranch property. It was a 2-room cabin, simple but solid, with a small porch and a view of the mountains. Xavier accepted on the condition that Fiona agreed to marry him. He proposed on a warm evening in late spring, 2 months after the flood that had brought them together. They were sitting on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Xavier took her hand and slid off the porch rail to kneel in front of her. "Fiona Calloway," he said, his dark eyes serious and full of love. "You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You have taken my life and filled it with light and meaning and joy. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me. Will you marry me?" Fiona felt tears stream down her face, but they were happy tears this time. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you." He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as they both laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, his hands tangled in her hair, and Fiona felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They were married a month later in the small church in White Pine. The whole town turned out for the wedding, curious to see the couple whose romance had begun so dramatically. Martha fussed over Fiona like a mother hen, helping her dress in a simple but beautiful white gown that had been Martha's own wedding dress. altered to fit. When Fiona walked down the aisle and saw Xavier waiting for her at the altar, looking impossibly handsome in his best clothes, his face full of love and wonder, she knew that the flood had been a blessing in disguise. It had destroyed her old life, yes, but it had brought her something infinitely more precious. It had brought her Xavier. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Xavier's hands shook slightly as he slid the gold band onto her finger, and his voice was rough with emotion when he said his vows. Fiona promised to love, honor, and cherish him, and meant every word with her whole heart. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her in front of the whole congregation, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. They moved into the small cabin on the Thornton ranch, and Fiona set about making it a home. She hung her mother's quilts on the walls, placed her father's books on a shelf Xavier built, and filled the windows with wildflowers. Xavier crafted furniture in the evenings, his skilled hands creating a table, chairs, a chest for their clothes. Together they built a life. Fiona continued to do mending and laundry, but now it was supplemented by Xavier's steady income as foreman. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable. More importantly, they were happy. Martha became the mother Fiona had lost, teaching her recipes and household skills, offering advice and comfort when needed. Tom treated Xavier like the son he had never had, teaching him everything he knew about running a ranch. The other ranch hands became like brothers, teasing Xavier good-naturedly about being a married man now and treating Fiona with respectful affection. As summer turned to fall, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the stars come out. He stared at her in wonder for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy that probably woke everyone on the ranch. He scooped her up carefully and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Fiona asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Xavier said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You have given me everything I ever wanted, a home, a purpose, and now a family. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. Fiona suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and Xavier hovered anxiously, bringing her ginger tea and cool cloths and anything else that might help. Martha assured them both that it was normal, that it would pass, and eventually it did. As Fiona's belly grew round with their child, Xavier became even more protective. He did not want her lifting anything heavy or working too hard. He insisted she rest, put her feet up, let him take care of her for once. Fiona protested at first, not used to being cared for, but eventually she gave in and let herself enjoy being pampered. In the evenings, Xavier would place his hands on her belly and talk to the baby, telling stories about his childhood in Missouri and making promises about the life they would have. Fiona would watch him with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by love for this gentle, strong man who had become her whole world. Winter came, and with it the worry about the baby arriving during a snowstorm. But the baby seemed determined to arrive on a mild day in late February, when the first hints of spring were teasing at the winter landscape. Fiona's labor began in the early morning hours, and Xavier immediately sent one of the hands for the midwife while he stayed by Fiona's side. Martha arrived within minutes, calm and competent, directing Xavier to heat water and gather towels. The midwife arrived an hour later, a capable older woman who had delivered half the babies in White Pine. The labor was long and hard. Fiona had never experienced pain like this, waves of it that seemed to crack her open. But Xavier never left her side. He held her hand through every contraction, let her squeeze until his fingers turned white, wiped her face with cool cloths, and murmured encouragement in her ear. "You can do this," he said over and over. "You are the strongest person I know. Just a little longer, love. Just a little longer." As the sun began to set, painting their small cabin in warm, golden light, their son was born. He came into the world with a healthy cry that made Xavier laugh and weep at the same time. The midwife cleaned the baby and placed him in Fiona's arms, and they both stared down at the tiny, perfect miracle they had created. "He is beautiful," Xavier whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like his mother." "He has your eyes," Fiona said, tracing the baby's tiny features. "And your chin." They named him Daniel after Fiona's father, Daniel Xavier Miller, a name that honored both their pasts and looked toward their future. Xavier was a devoted father from the first moment. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Daniel at night when he would not sleep, and could be found at all hours just staring at his son with an expression of absolute wonder. Fiona watched him with her heart full, falling even more in love with her husband as she watched him with their child. As Daniel grew, so did their family. A daughter came 2 years later with Fiona's dark hair and Xavier's dark eyes. They named her Rose after Xavier's mother. Then another son 3 years after that, sturdy and calm, whom they named Thomas after Tom Thornton, who had become like a father to them both. Life was full and busy and sometimes exhausting, but it was also rich with love and laughter. Their small cabin rang with the sounds of children playing, Xavier's deep laugh, Fiona's singing as she worked. They added a room to accommodate their growing family, Xavier and the other ranch hands building it in their spare time. Tom Thornton began to slow down as the years passed, his age finally catching up with him. He relied more and more on Xavier to manage the day-to-day operations of the ranch, and when Tom finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, he left the ranch to Martha, with the stipulation that Xavier would continue as foreman for as long as he wished. Martha, who had come to love Fiona like a daughter and the children like her grandchildren, was grateful for their presence. She moved into the main house's smaller guest wing, insisting that Xavier and Fiona take over the main living areas. They protested, but Martha was firm. The house was too big for one old woman, she said, and it should be filled with the sound of children. So they moved into the big house, and their family continued to grow. Another daughter arrived, then twin boys who kept everyone on their toes. Fiona sometimes could hardly believe that this was her life. She who had been so alone, so desperate, was now surrounded by love and family and purpose. Xavier thrived as foreman and de facto owner of the ranch. He was fair with the hands, innovative in his methods, and the ranch prospered under his leadership. He was respected throughout the county, known as a man of integrity and skill. But no matter how busy he got, he always made time for his family. He taught his sons to ride and rope, taught his daughters to be strong and independent, and loved Fiona with the same fierce devotion he had shown from the beginning. On quiet evenings, when the children were in bed and they had the house to themselves, Xavier and Fiona would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, just as they had on the night he proposed. Sometimes they talked about the early days, about the flood that had brought them together, about how close they had come to never finding each other. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I had not come for you that day?" Xavier asked one evening, his arm around her shoulders. "I try not to," Fiona admitted, leaning into his warmth. "Because I almost certainly would have drowned, but more than that, I cannot imagine my life without you, without all of this. You saved me in more ways than one, Xavier." "We saved each other," Xavier said, kissing the top of her head. "I was just going through the motions before you. Working, sending money home but not really living. You gave me a reason to build something permanent, to put down roots. You gave me a home. As the years passed, their children grew and started families of their own. Daniel became a doctor, the first in the family to attend university, making them both proud beyond measure. He married a schoolteacher and settled in Carson City. Rose married a rancher and stayed close, giving Fiona and Xavier the joy of watching their grandchildren grow up nearby. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing the same skill and dedication his father had, eventually marrying and bringing his wife to live in the foreman's cabin, where Xavier and Fiona had started their marriage. Their other children scattered to various corners of Nevada and beyond, but they all stayed close in heart, if not always in distance. The big house was filled with noise and laughter whenever the family gathered for holidays and celebrations. Martha lived to see all of Fiona and Xavier's children grown, passing away peacefully at 87 with Fiona holding one hand and Xavier holding the other. They buried her next to Tom on a hillside overlooking the ranch she had loved, and mourned her like the mother and friend she had been. Xavier and Fiona grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces marking with lines earned through years of laughter and love and hard work. But Xavier still looked at Fiona the way he had that first day when he pulled her from the flood, with wonder and devotion. And Fiona still felt her heart skip when Xavier smiled at her, still felt that flutter of joy when he took her hand. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate. The house overflowed with family, 3 generations testament to the love that had started with a cowboy swimming through floodwaters to save a woman he barely knew. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Xavier and Fiona sat on their porch once more, watching the stars. Xavier took her hand, his fingers still strong despite his 75 years. 50 years, he said softly, and I love you more now than I did the day I married you. I did not think that was possible, Fiona said, smiling at him, but I feel the same way. You have been my partner, my protector, my best friend. You are still my hero, Xavier. And you are still my miracle, Xavier replied, lifting her hand to kiss it. The flood took everything you had, but it brought you to me. I will always be grateful for that, even though I hate what you had to suffer. It was worth it, Fiona said firmly. Every moment of fear, every loss, it was all worth it to find you, to build this life with you. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over the mountains, their hands intertwined. The creek that had once threatened to take everything from them now burbled peacefully in the distance, contained within its banks. The land that had seemed so harsh and unforgiving had become their home, blessed by their love and the family they had built. Fiona thought about the scared, lonely girl she had been, trapped in that cabin with the water rising. She had thought her life was ending that day. But it had only been beginning. Xavier had not just saved her life, he had given her a reason to live it fully. He had shown her what love could be, what family could be, what home could be. What are you thinking about? Xavier asked, noticing her faraway expression. About how lucky I am, Fiona said simply. About how that terrible day turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. Xavier pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. It was the same strong, steady rhythm she had felt all those years ago when he carried her through the flood. The rhythm that had carried her through 50 years of marriage, of joy and sorrow, of triumph and challenge. I love you, Fiona, Xavier murmured. I love you too, she whispered back. They sat there together as the stars wheeled overhead, 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful and lasting. The creek that had once divided them now connected them, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. Years later, when Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, surrounded by his children and with Fiona holding his hand, his last words were of love for her. Fiona grieved deeply, but found comfort in the incredible life they had shared, in the family they had built, in the 57 years of love and partnership that nothing could diminish. She lived another 5 years, staying sharp and active, delighting in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told them all the story of how she and Xavier met, about the flood and the cowboy who swam through dangerous waters to save her. She wanted them to know that true love existed, that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things. When Fiona finally closed her eyes for the last time at 84, surrounded by family in the house she and Xavier had filled with love, her last thoughts were of that first kiss, of Xavier's arms around her, of the moment she knew her life had changed forever. They buried her next to Xavier on the hillside overlooking the ranch, under a simple stone that read Fiona Miller, beloved wife, mother, and friend. The creek below continued its eternal song, no longer a symbol of danger, but of the love story it had inadvertently created, a reminder that sometimes the strongest floods are the ones that sweep us toward our destiny rather than away from it. Their descendants continued to ranch the land, generation after generation, always remembering the story of the flood and the cowboy and the woman who found forever love in the midst of disaster. The cabin where Daniel and his siblings had been born was preserved as a family landmark, and every wedding anniversary, the family would gather there to celebrate not just the couple of the hour, but the legacy of love that Xavier and Fiona had established. The white pines that gave the town its name grew tall and strong, just like the family tree that Xavier and Fiona had planted together. And on quiet nights when the moon was full and the creek sang its ancient song, some swore they could still feel the presence of that love, powerful and enduring, a testament to the truth that real love never dies but lives on in the hearts and lives it touches, rippling outward like circles in water, forever and always.